In the rugged highlands of Kenya's Maasai Mara, a female leopard committed an act so shocking that it defied millions of years of evolutionary programming, and the heartbreaking chain of events that followed would challenge everything wildlife. Experts believed about the boundaries between natural enemies. The golden savanna stretched endlessly under the scorching African sun, where the Simba Pride had claimed territory along the winding Talak River. This was prime hunting ground, where gazelles gathered to drink and zebras grazed in the open grasslands. The pride consisted of 3 adult lionesses, 2 adolescent males, and 4 precious cubs who had been born just 6 weeks earlier during the height of the dry season. Among these cubs was Jengo, a male with unusually pale golden fur and striking amber eyes that seemed too large for his small face. Unlike his robust siblings who tumbled and wrestled with endless energy, Jengo moved differently. He was born with a malformed front paw that twisted inward, causing him to limp with each step. While his littermates pounced on insects and chased their own tails, Jengo often sat quietly in the shade, watching the world with those penetrating eyes that held an almost human-like intelligence. The pride's matriarch, Nyota, was a battle-scarred lioness who had successfully raised 7 litters over her 12 years. She understood the harsh mathematics of survival in the Mara. Resources were limited, predators were constant threats, and every decision meant the difference between the continuation or extinction of her bloodline. When she looked at Jengo struggling to keep up with his siblings, her maternal instincts warred with brutal pragmatism. The territory surrounding their den was unforgiving. Hyena clans patrolled the borders nightly, their haunting calls echoing across the plains. Leopards moved like ghosts through the acacia trees, always watching for opportunities. Even other lion prides posed threats, with nomadic males constantly seeking to overthrow established families and kill cubs to bring females back into estrus. In this environment, weakness was a luxury the pride could not afford. Jengo's disability made him slower during relocations, louder when stealth was required, and unable to climb termite mounds, where cubs often sought safety during hunts. His distinctive limp left tracks that were easy for predators to follow, potentially endangering the entire family. As the weeks passed, Jengo's condition seemed to worsen rather than improve. The twisted paw developed recurring infections from cuts sustained on rocky terrain. He required more attention from Nyota, attention that should have been distributed among all 4 cubs. His siblings, stronger and more agile, began to instinctively distance themselves from their different brother, following patterns encoded in their DNA that favored the survival of the fittest. The rains had failed for the 3rd consecutive year, turning waterholes into cracked earth and forcing prey animals to migrate earlier than usual. Food became scarce, and the pride faced increasing pressure to relocate to more abundant hunting grounds. But any move would require traveling vast distances across open territory, where a limping cub would become a fatal liability. The crisis began on a sweltering Tuesday morning when scouts from the rival Kikoka Pride were spotted marking trees just 3 kilometers from Nyota's territory. These intruders were led by Maku, a massive male whose scarred muzzle told stories of countless battles won. His pride was desperate, driven from their traditional lands by expanding human settlements, and they viewed the Simba Pride's rich territory as their salvation. Nyota called an emergency gathering, her deep growls summoning the adult females to a rocky outcrop overlooking their domain. The discussion was brief but decisive. They had perhaps 48 hours before Maku's forces would attempt to take over. Any cubs that couldn't keep pace during the inevitable flight would perish, either from exhaustion or at the claws of the invaders who would kill rival bloodlines without hesitation. The lionesses began immediate preparations for exodus. They methodically dismantled scent markers, cached remaining food supplies, and taught the cubs emergency signals for silent movement. But as they practiced formation running across the valley floor, Jengo's limitations became catastrophically apparent. His twisted paw caught on every root and stone, causing him to stumble and fall behind within minutes. During a desperate training session, Jengo collapsed completely after attempting to navigate a dried riverbed. His infected paw had swollen to twice its normal size, and fever made his amber eyes dull with pain. Nyota stood over her failing cub, her tail twitching with the weight of an impossible decision. The other cubs waited impatiently, their survival instincts already telling them to abandon their weakest sibling. That evening, as crimson sunset painted the acacia trees, Nyota made the choice that would haunt her forever. She gathered her 3 healthy cubs and began moving them toward a distant kopje where they could establish a temporary stronghold. Jengo, too weak to follow, remained behind in a shallow cave beneath a fallen baobab tree. His pitiful calls for his mother echoed across the darkening savanna, but Nyota forced herself not to look back. The abandoned cub spent his first night alone, shivering against the cold, his small body racked with fever and infection. Every sound, the rustle of grass, the distant roar of hippos, the pat of unknown paws sent terror coursing through his weakened frame. He had never been separated from his family, never faced the African wilderness without protection. As dawn approached, Jengo's condition deteriorated rapidly. Dehydration parched his throat, hunger gnawed at his empty stomach, and the infected paw throbbed with each heartbeat. He attempted to drag himself toward the river for water, but managed only a few meters before exhaustion overwhelmed him. Collapsing in a patch of thorny scrub, the cub resigned himself to the fate that awaited all creatures too weak to survive in this merciless landscape. Above him, unseen eyes watched from the twisted branches of a dead tree. Amara was not like other leopards. At 8 years old, she had earned her reputation throughout the Mara as the ghost huntress, a solitary predator whose spotted coat seemed to blend with shadows themselves. Her territory encompassed 15 square kilometers of riverine forest, rocky outcrops, and dense thickets where she moved with supernatural silence. Unlike the social lions, Amara lived by a code of absolute independence, trusting no creature except herself. But 3 weeks earlier, tragedy had shattered her carefully ordered world. After carrying her 2 cubs for over 3 months, Amara had given birth to stillborn offspring beneath a massive fig tree. The loss devastated her in ways that went beyond mere disappointment. Her maternal hormones still surged through her bloodstream. Her enlarged mammary glands ached with unused milk, and her denning instincts remained powerfully active despite having no young to protect. Since the stillbirth, Amara had become increasingly restless and aggressive. She attacked her own reflection in river pools, shredded bark from trees with unnecessary violence, and called out with haunting vocalizations that other leopards instinctively avoided. The Maasai herders whispered that she had been cursed by evil spirits, while wildlife researchers noted unusual behavioral patterns that suggested severe psychological distress. On this particular morning, Amara was tracking a small antelope through the thorny scrubland when an unfamiliar scent stopped. Her cold, lion cub, but not the robust, healthy smell of a pride-protected youngster. This carried undertones of sickness, fear, and abandonment that triggered something primal in her grief-altered mind. Following the scent trail with predatory precision, Amara discovered Jengo collapsed beneath the thorny bush. The tiny lion lay, motionless except for his labored breathing, his golden fur matted with dirt and blood from the infected paw. In his weakened state, he appeared even smaller than her own lost cubs had been, and his pitiful condition activated every maternal circuit in her brain. Normal leopard behavior would have demanded she kill this future competitor immediately. Lion cubs represented everything her species feared, the promise of a powerful predator that would one day challenge leopards for territory and prey. But Amara's psychological state was far from normal. The sight of the helpless creature triggered a flood of nurturing hormones that overwhelmed millions of years of evolutionary programming. She approached cautiously, her amber eyes studying the cub's labored breathing and swollen paw. Jengo sensed her presence and opened his eyes, expecting death. Instead, he found himself staring into the face of his species' ancient enemy. Yet something in those golden depths conveyed not menace but curiosity. Amara extended her rough tongue and began cleaning the infection from his wounded paw with the same gentle precision she would have used on her own offspring. Then, making a decision that defied nature itself, the leopard carefully grasped Jengo by the scruff of his neck and lifted him from the thorny ground. Amara's den lay hidden within a labyrinth of granite boulders near the river's edge, accessible only through a narrow crevice that larger predators could not navigate. The chamber inside was spacious enough for a leopard and her cubs, with soft sand floors and walls that retained warmth during cold nights. Here, in the sanctuary that should have housed her own offspring, the grieving leopard gently deposited the dying lion cub. Jengo's body temperature had dropped dangerously low during his abandonment, and his breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. Amara instinctively curled her spotted body around him, sharing her warmth while her rough tongue worked methodically to clean his matted fur. The infected paw required immediate attention, and she licked away the accumulated pus and debris with surgical precision, her saliva containing natural antiseptic properties that began fighting the dangerous bacteria. The most critical challenge came within hours. Jengo's weakened state demanded immediate nutrition, but leopards and lions had vastly different dietary requirements and feeding behaviors. Adult lions consumed large communal kills, while leopards were adapted for smaller, more frequent meals. Amara faced an impossible dilemma. She needed to provide sustenance that Jengo's system could handle, but her hunting instincts were calibrated for prey, completely inappropriate for a 6-week-old cub. Driven by desperation and maternal programming, Amara made multiple hunting expeditions over the next day, returning with increasingly smaller prey. She began with a young impala, far too large and tough for the cub's digestive system. When Jengo couldn't manage the meat, she brought back smaller animals, dik-diks, rock hyrax, and finally birds that she could tear into manageable pieces. Breakthrough came when Amara's own milk production, stimulated by the cub's presence and her nurturing behaviors, began flowing again. The hormonal response to caring for young had reactivated her dormant mammary glands, allowing her to provide the critical nutrition that Jengo desperately needed. When the cub instinctively sought her belly and began nursing, Amara experienced a surge of biochemical satisfaction that temporarily filled the void left by her lost offspring. Within 72 hours of his rescue, Jengo showed remarkable improvement. The infection in his paw began responding to Amara's constant cleaning. His fever broke, and color returned to his previously dull eyes. More surprisingly, he began vocalizing with chirping sounds that closely resembled leopard cub calls rather than typical lion roars. His attempts to communicate with his adoptive mother were creating an acoustic bridge between their species. Amara responded to these sounds with the soft chuffing vocalizations she would have used with her own cubs, establishing a unique interspecies dialogue. She taught him to follow specific calls that indicated danger, feeding time, or the need for silence. Their bond deepened through this primitive but effective communication system that transcended the biological barriers separating their kinds. Transformation of Jengo over the following weeks astonished even Amara herself. The lion cub, now thriving under her care, began exhibiting behaviors that blurred the line between his natural instincts and learned leopard techniques. His twisted paw, while still malformed, grew stronger through constant use on the rocky terrain around their den. The infection had completely healed, leaving behind scar tissue that actually improved his grip on rough surfaces. Under Amara's tutelage, Jengo learned to move with the silent precision of a leopard rather than the bold swagger typical of young lions. She taught him to place his paws deliberately, avoiding dry leaves and loose stones that might betray their position. His natural lion coordination, combined with these stealth techniques, created a hunting style unlike anything seen in either species. Despite his disability, Jengo could navigate the granite maze around their den with remarkable agility. The dietary adaptation proved even more surprising. Where lion cubs typically gorge themselves on large kills brought by pride members, Jengo learned to appreciate the smaller, more frequent meals that Amara provided. His digestive system gradually adjusted to the leopard feeding pattern, and he developed a preference for fish that Amara caught from the shallow pools near their den. This unusual diet contributed to his lean, muscular build that resembled neither typical lion nor leopard physique. Their daily routines established a rhythm that seemed natural despite its biological impossibility. Each dawn, Amara would lead Jengo through stalking exercises among the boulders, teaching him to freeze at her subtle signals and move only when shadows provided cover. His amber eyes learned to track the tiny movements that indicated prey, while his ears developed the acute sensitivity that leopards used to detect danger from multiple directions. But their unconventional family faced growing threats from the outside world. Other leopards in the area had detected Amara's scent mixed with the unmistakable odor of lion, creating territorial disputes that grew more aggressive each week. Male leopards, in particular, viewed Jengo as an abomination that threatened the natural order. Their territorial markings became increasingly hostile, and several times Amara had to relocate their activities to avoid confrontations. Dangerous still were the hyena clans that patrolled the riverbank nightly. These intelligent scavengers had learned to associate unusual scent combinations with easy meals, and they began systematic searches of the rocky areas where Amara and Jengo spent their days. Their persistence forced the unlikely pair to develop escape routes through boulder passages too narrow for hyena pursuit. But the constant pressure took its toll on both animals. The most heartbreaking challenge came from Jengo's own developing instincts, which increasingly conflicted with his adopted lifestyle. As Jengo matured into his third month, his lion heritage began asserting itself in ways that created impossible conflicts. His natural roaring instincts developed despite Amara's attempts to teach him leopard vocalizations, and his deep calls echoed across the valley in a way that announced their location to every predator within kilometers. His body grew larger and more muscular than any leopard cub, making their shared den increasingly cramped and their stealth movements more difficult. The breaking point came during a hunting lesson when Jengo's predatory instincts overwhelmed his learned behaviors. Instead of the patient stalking technique Amara had taught him, he attempted to charge a young gazelle in the open grassland, his lion DNA driving him toward the bold, cooperative hunting style of his birth species. The failed hunt not only cost them a meal, but attracted the attention of a wandering hyena pack that had been tracking their unusual scent signature for days. That night, surrounded by the haunting calls of closing hyenas, Amara made the most difficult decision of her life. She understood that Jengo's survival depended not on her protection, but on reuniting him with his own kind. Her maternal love, which had saved him from certain death, now demanded that she release him to live as nature intended. The psychological torment of this realization manifested in heartbreaking vocalizations that carried across the savannah for hours out at dawn. Amara began leading Jengo toward the territory where his birth pride had been spotted by territorial scouts. The journey took 2 days, with the leopard carefully avoiding human settlements and rival predator territories, while her adopted cub followed trustingly behind. His twisted paw, now strengthened by months of rocky terrain navigation, carried him steadily across the grasslands toward an uncertain reunion. When they reached the border of Simba Pride territory, Amara detected fresh lion scent markers indicating the pride's recent presence. She guided Jengo to a watering hole where lions frequently gathered, then began the agonizing process of separation. Her final act of maternal love was teaching him the distinctive roaring pattern that would identify him as a member of his birth. Pride rather than a threat, Jengo seemed to understand that their time together was ending. He pressed his massive head against his adopted mother's spotted flank, purring in the leopard manner she had taught him rather than using typical lion affection displays. When Amara finally turned to leave, her grief was so intense that she remained within sight, hidden in nearby trees. To ensure his safety during the crucial reunion, within hours, Jengo's distinctive roar brought investigating lionesses to the watering hole, and his scent signature confirmed his identity as Nyota's lost cub. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The reunion between Nyota and her lost cub was unlike anything witnessed in the African wilderness. When the matriarch first saw Jengo emerge from the acacia thicket, her initial response was suspicion rather than joy. The cub before her bore only superficial resemblance to the weak, infected youngling she had abandoned months earlier. This Jengo moved with fluid grace despite his twisted paw. His muscles were lean and powerful, and his eyes held an alertness that seemed almost supernatural. Most disturbing to Nyota was his scent signature, which carried unmistakable traces of leopard musk intermingled with his natural lion odor. Her maternal instincts warred with territorial alarm as she tried to comprehend how her dying cub had not only survived but thrived in the company of their species' ancient enemy. The other lionesses formed a defensive semicircle, their confusion evident as they processed the impossible biological evidence before them. Jengo approached his birth mother with a peculiar combination of lion and leopard behaviors that created an almost surreal interaction. He attempted the headbutting affection typical of lion cubs, but combined it with the chirping vocalizations and scent-marking patterns Amara had taught him. His movement patterns were wrong for a lion, too silent, too calculated, lacking the boisterous confidence that characterized cubs raised within a pride structure. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The most shocking revelation came when Jengo demonstrated his learned hunting techniques. A small ground squirrel ventured near the watering hole, and instead of the clumsy pouncing attempts typical of young lions, Jengo executed a perfect leopard-style stalk. He moved through tall grass with absolute silence, used available cover with tactical precision, and struck with a speed and accuracy that left the adult lionesses stunned. His success rate on small prey was already superior to cubs twice his age, but integration proved more challenging than survival had been. The other Pride members, particularly Jengo's biological siblings, rejected him with increasing hostility. His scent contamination made them uncomfortable. His unusual behaviors triggered their predator identification instincts, and his superior hunting skills on smaller prey created jealousy and resentment. During feeding times, they actively excluded him from shared kills, forcing him to rely on the independent hunting methods Amara had taught him. Nyota found herself caught between maternal love and pack loyalty. She recognized that Jengo's survival had been miraculous, and his unique skills could potentially benefit the Pride's hunting success. However, his presence created tension among Pride members who viewed his leopard-influenced behaviors as a threat to their social cohesion. His very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about species boundaries and natural order that governed their world. The crisis deepened when territorial disputes with neighboring prides intensified, forcing Nyota to make strategic decisions about Jengo's role within their survival structure. During reconnaissance missions to establish new boundaries, his leopard-trained stealth abilities proved invaluable for gathering intelligence about rival Pride movements. He could approach enemy positions undetected, assess their numbers and intentions, then report back with information that gave Simba Pride crucial tactical advantages. However, these same skills that made him valuable also made him increasingly isolated from normal Pride social dynamics. Young lions learned through group play, collaborative hunting practice, and shared experiences that built lifetime bonds. Jengo's solitary approach to problems and his instinctive preference for individual rather than cooperative solutions marked him as fundamentally different from his littermates and cousins. The psychological toll became evident during a drought that lasted 7 weeks. While other Pride members huddled together for comfort and shared diminishing water sources, Jengo instinctively sought out hidden springs and cached water sources using techniques Amara had taught him during their time together. His survival skills kept him healthy while others weakened, but his independence during the crisis deepened the emotional distance between him and his family. Nyota observed these changes with growing heartache. The son she had abandoned to save her pride had transformed into something that belonged fully to neither world. His loyalty to the Pride was absolute. His protective instincts toward his biological family were fierce, yet he remained fundamentally separate from the social bonds that defined lion existence. She began to understand that Amara's gift of survival had come with an irreversible cost. The turning point arrived when a coalition of nomadic males threatened to overthrow their territory entirely. These intruders, battle-hardened and desperate, represented an existential threat to every cub and lioness in Simba Pride. Traditional lion defensive strategies, roaring displays, territorial marking, and group intimidation proved insufficient against determined invaders who had nothing left to lose. In desperation, Nyota turned to Jengo's unique abilities for a solution that no normal Pride could have conceived. She asked him to employ his leopard learned stealth and strategic thinking to eliminate the threat through methods that went beyond conventional lion warfare. The request placed him in an impossible position, forcing him to choose between his learned identity and his biological heritage, while the survival of his entire family hung in the balance. That night, as the nomadic males prepared their final assault, Jengo made a decision that would define not only his own fate, but the future of interspecies understanding in the Maasai Mara, hidden from both prides in the darkness. He began implementing a plan that drew upon every lesson Amara had taught him about survival, strategy, and the delicate balance between mercy and necessary violence. Jengo executed a strategy that no lion had ever attempted before, using darkness as his ally. He systematically sabotaged the nomadic males' water sources, destroyed their scent markers, and created false trails that led them in circles across the territory. His leopard-trained stealth allowed him to move within meters of the sleeping invaders, while his lion strength enabled him to manipulate their environment in ways that gradually drove them toward psychological exhaustion. By dawn, the confused and dehydrated nomads found themselves surrounded by the scent signatures of a massive Pride that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Jengo's strategic deception convinced them they faced a supernatural enemy, and they retreated from the territory without ever engaging in direct combat. The Simba Pride was saved through tactics that existed nowhere in natural lion behavior. Nyota finally understood that her son's hybrid identity was not a curse, but an evolutionary gift. Jengo had become something entirely new, a bridge between worlds that possessed the best qualities of both species, while belonging fully to neither. The Pride began adapting their strategies to incorporate his unique perspectives, creating hunting and defensive techniques that revolutionized their survival success. Years later, Jengo established his own territory on the border between leopard and lion domains, where he served as an unlikely ambassador between traditional enemies. His offspring, raised with both lion social bonds and leopard independence, began establishing a new behavioral pattern that wildlife researchers would study for decades to come. But perhaps the most profound legacy was the lesson he embodied. That survival sometimes requires transcending the limitations others impose upon us, and that our greatest weaknesses can become our most extraordinary strengths. If this incredible story of resilience and transformation moved you, there are thousands more untold tales from the African wilderness waiting to be discovered. The natural world continues to surprise us with examples of courage, adaptation, and the power of unlikely connections that challenge everything we think we know about the boundaries between species, between enemies, and between what's possible and what's impossible. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our community of wildlife enthusiasts who believe that every creature has a story worth telling, and every story has the power to change how we see the world around us.